Good morning. Welcome. I'm glad to have you here. I'm glad to share a little information and to learn from you. I want to leave you with two suggestions from my classes. Both of them I've learned from other professional development workshops that I've done over the semesters with a global campus. The first one, a simple change, and it's opened my class up in enhanced discussion. I put them in small groups, but in the early years, I used to write all the discussion questions each week. I have stopped doing that. I model that in the first module, but after the second module, modules 2 and 3 in the middle of the class, I asked the class members to break into small groups, and each of them takes a week as group leader. I cannot tell you how powerful that has been. It has been enriching for the groups. They have been respectful of one another. A couple of weeks ago, I had a group leader assigned for a week, and she had an emergency and was hospitalized for a week. I went to the group and I said, here's what has happened. Can someone step up? And I had 3 volunteers within 5 minutes. Their questions are more robust than the ones that I create. They ask questions about the content that I would not and that I had not considered. And so I leave you with that one suggestion about figuring out ways to use the group in your small group work, asking them to take leadership, and it enhances their experience, increases their ownership of the discussion. The second recommendation I'll just share with what I did this morning. Today, here we are on the 50th anniversary of the Martin Luther King Jr. assassination, and there are a lot of activities going on around the country. For many, it's a sensitive topic. I have 3 classes that have cultural content that is tied with things that are happening in the real world. And I create on events like today, for special events that we know are going on around the country, I will just create a new special single online discussion board. I give them permission, and I use that language. I give you permission to share whatever is most comfortable. I usually, as I did this morning, I attach some links to additional, there's an online discussion going on all day today at the Civil Rights Museum in Memphis. Throughout the day, there were some materials on there about changes that have happened in the city over the last 50 years. And I just included all of that in a discussion. Now, by the time I get back after this program, we may have some discussion going on around that. It's a tough topic for some, sensitive for others. We have a variety of opinions, but I work hard to keep that space safe for them. And I share that with you. Thank you.
You want me to go ahead?
Yeah.
Okay, well, kind of feeding off of what Laura said about that you don't have to do a discussion group every week. I tend to do mine about every 2 weeks. So we have a different type of assignment that they submit to me weekly, but discussion boards are usually every 2 weeks. I do follow always having the same date midweek where their initial post is due, and then their comments to group members are due 3 days later, so that gives them some time to do that. One of the things that I did, and I hadn't even thought about this until yesterday, one of the audience members, Lisa Rubin, helped me with a class one semester, and she commented in the thing yesterday about my practice of creating a spreadsheet when the course first starts and everybody introduces themselves. And so in their introduction, I pull out information about, where they're from, what kind of role they're in. This is for a class for college academic advisors. If they're whatever they've shared, if they're married, how long they've been practicing, or if they're not in the field, all those sorts of things. And then that spreadsheet helps me personalize some information when I'm responding to their comments. Like if somebody says something and I think, oh, well, they haven't worked in the field yet, or they have 20 years of experience. It makes it more meaningful that way. And I know Lisa said that was something that she took away from one of my practices. Also, I do a weekly memo in my class. So before we start the next week and we're talking about what our topic's going to be, if we've had a discussion board that week, I usually pull out some things, and I think Laura kind of mentioned that too, of pulling out some strong comments or things that people had said that I want to share with the whole group. I do divide my class into groups, small groups for discussion, that and I'm a little purposeful in that. I have some discussions boards that are open to the whole class, but when they're responding to one another, I try to break it up into the groups. And again, I use that spreadsheet of information about the students so that I get a good mix in my groups of people that are outside the field, people that are been advising, people that are just starting, people from different parts of the country, different sizes of programs and universities if they are in an advising role. So that way I feel like the discussion is richer within those groups. And then another thing that I've done sometimes is at mid-semesters, I do a whole new grouping, you know, so that those groups don't get stale in their discussions through the semester. I usually, a lot of my discussion groups are about readings that they've done, and so I do use the policy of not letting them view somebody else's post until they've posted. As we know, sometimes students can get around that. They can, you know, click on something and add something real quick. But, you know, I've actually had other students call out students on doing that, not directly to the other students, but I've had students contact me and say, I think so-and-so, you know, might have done this. So they kind of police each other on that. There are different kinds of prompts that you can use. Sometimes you can think about what they call a jigsaw prompt, where you have, you tell your students to share something that hasn't been shared in a previous post, something about the readings, or to expand on something that in a way that nobody else has so far. I have used the idea that Doris talked about of having students be the person who creates the questions. You know, I think again, starting that off as initially, and then having students kind of take the lead, and I would agree that you get some very rich questions from that to take the lead on those discussions. Something that I used a couple of summers ago, and I think I used it for about a year. I didn't use it this year. It's an app that's available through Canvas called Yelich-Biniecki. Jana Fallon turned me on to Ben Ward. Was brought in. Yeah, he brought a few of us in and introduced us to that. It's integrated in Canvas. I don't know what the status is, if you have to pay for it. No, you don't. Okay, good. Okay. But one of the things I liked about Yelich-Biniecki is that it added kind of a separate layer of discussions. It's really kind of a social media type environment. So students, the way I use Yelich-Biniecki is students could, if they came across something, a video, a news article, whatever, something that was relevant to our class. In the past, a lot of times students would send those to me, you know, and say, oh, Dr. K, did you know about this? Or this was interesting. By having Yelich-Biniecki set up as a discussion on there, they could add that and everybody in the class could see it. And it's a really nice way to upload videos, news stories, links to different things. And then in the social media kind of environment, students can like it, which they can do on our discussion boards in Canvas anyway, but they can also share it. They can say this isn't relevant. They can bookmark it. You know, there's lots of things that they can do, and they can do comments on it. And so I found that that was a really good way to keep our course current with things that are going on that students find. It even has some features. I didn't use these a lot, where you can give students points by set up a rubrics of sorts where they get points if they have an initial new post, and then if they respond, and how many words they put in their response. You know, I didn't get into that level of detail, but it has a lot of things that you can do. And so I thought that was kind of innovative I used that in my course for a couple of years. So I'll
Okay.
stop there.
I teach in the Department of Food, Nutrition, Dietetics, and Health, and I teach primarily seniors, some juniors, and it's medical nutrition therapy. So they're learning about the nutrition for disease states. I have 2 classes online every semester. Starting with the 3rd week, there is a discussion every week. It takes very little effort on my part at all, which is the nice thing about it. So first I'll tell you is how I structure it, and then I'll tell you the things I learned about it. They are divided into small groups for the discussions, but everybody participates in every discussion, but the small group is also used for some other assignments in the course. And they have group contracts is the first thing that they have to set up that says, how are we going to communicate? Are we going to do it through Google Docs? Are we going to meet in a chat session? Are we going to call each other on the phone because they're in different time zones? So they have to set up this group contract initially before they even start determining how they're going to handle it, the discussions. And then they'll talk about for each assignment, okay, I'll do this part, you'll do this part, maybe all of us are going to do, but again, they have to decide as a group. So that takes away the responsibility on my part of getting an email from somebody that said, so-and-so's not pulling their weight. I looked up the article, I developed the questions, and so this has to be handled initially. So as part of the group, each one is assigned 1 week that they are moderators. And so, for example, next week our discussion is on renal disease. So the group that is moderator for that week had to pick out an article as a group and develop 3 to 4, no more than 4, discussion questions related to that. And as was mentioned in your presentation, they need to be open-ended. I don't want, tell me what the article said. It's what's your opinion? What do you think? Would you do anything different? Do you have a family member that experienced this? So it needs to be open-ended. The class that is responding only gets 3 points for answering these 3 to 4 questions. And that's one of the reasons it takes me very little time to grade, because when I go through it, I don't read every single answer because I have 120 students each week that I'm grading on between the classes. I go look through and scan. Did they answer? Did they answer? They get points. So the moderators get more points. It's only 8 total. It's still not a lot, but there's really rich discussions going on. Moderators get 4 points for the minimum of 4 times throughout the week to keep the discussion going.
Hey, there you are.
Say, I liked what you said. Tell me more. Or you said this. Can you give me an example? With the distance classes, the moderators respond far more than 4 times. My campus students do their 4 responses and they're done.
Oh, geez.
They don't need discussions. They're talking to people all week long. The distance students, I get double to triple from the entire class the number of responses I'm required. So as moderators, they get 4 points for responding a minimum of 4 times. The other 4 points come from just finding the article, developing the questions, and posting a summary. That's what I read. So they have from Monday through Saturday midnight to post the response. And then by Monday morning, 9 a.m., the moderators have to have a summary of the discussion. And that's what I focus on. What did the class think as a whole in terms of how they answer? And so from the distance students, I get very, very rich discussions. My campus students, I have to prod regularly. You're having a conversation, go back in, they asked you a question. And so what I've learned from it, as mentioned, let them pick the topic. When I first started doing this, I picked really interesting topics and articles, and I found out what I find interesting, they don't find interesting. So when I backed away, then the discussion increased. The second thing I've learned is stay out of the discussion, because when they sense your presence, they back off. One time, a student goaded me, he baited me, and I bit, and I got in on the discussion. It was rather controversial, and for 2 days, it was just he and I talking, and nobody else was talking. So stay out of the discussion. The third thing that I've learned is let them handle inflammatory, sensitive situations, because they are adults. They're going to experience this in the field. When it was the cancer discussion, the question was, what do you think of Gardasil, which is the vaccine when it first came out, that's highly protective against cervical cancer for women. They've since found out anal cancer in men, but it was related to cervical cancer. The question was, should it be a required immunization for everyone starting at like the age 12 because of the benefits. One of my students responded very early on, no, because you only have to worry about it if you have a promiscuous lifestyle. And that brought on very, very interesting discussion. So the student who made that post emailed me and she said, I'm being attacked. I'm being, you know, they really insulted me. They've hurt my feelings. What are you going to do about it? And I wrote her back. I said, I'm not the moderators. You know, you need to be communicating with the moderators about how you're feeling. And I wrote to the moderators. I said, you should be stepping in and handling this discussion. And so they did. They handled it. And I expect them to have these discussions in the workplace and with their peers, and without going, you know, to their instructor and saying, what am I supposed to say? And the other thing I found out by staying out of the discussion, it was just this last week, the discussion had to deal with pregnancy and some diets being recommended by physicians. And it centered around, would you recommend this diet to your client? Do you think it's safe? Why or why not? So I stayed out. It was 50-50. About half the class said, I think, you know, it sounds pretty safe. Yeah, I'd probably be okay because these doctors in this article said they had no problems with it. The other half was saying, we don't think the research is there, and we know that doctors don't necessarily know, you know, when it comes to diet. So in chat last week, they said, after the discussion was over, they said, what would you have done? I said, no, I would not recommend it. The research isn't there. I'm not taking a chance with pregnancy. And had I, you know, responded initially, then everybody was going to agree with me instead of having this discussion. So I, you know, we have discussions every week with the distance students in particular, very rich discussions. And the more I stay out of it, the better. It requires very little time on my part to grade them. In fact, it's only worth 40 points out of the entire semester for the discussions, and they're still very active. Out of about 500 points, 40 points related to discussing all semester long, and they're very active. Partly because as juniors and seniors, they know that if you miss the opportunity for 1 or 2 points, that's the difference between the A and the B and the B and the C. So I know that's part of it, but still the discussions are very rich, even though they get very little point reward. They enjoy the opportunity to discuss with other students because they're not in a classroom. So they want these discussions.
Okay, well, I actually have a different context in which I teach, and some of my suggestions may actually be a bit of the opposite, but I think it depends a lot on the context on which you facilitate learning. So all of my students are graduate students. They're master's or doctoral level students. I teach intensive courses, so they're 8 weeks long usually. I have all of my students are generally adult learners. So I teach in the adult learning and leadership program. So essentially I teach adults how to teach adults in a variety of contexts. It can be in the military, in for-profit, and so on and so forth. I also organize, I think that what I hear from everybody is really figuring out how to establish online instructor presence. And that differs from everybody's context and how that works. And for some weeks, when I have students, I don't post as much online. And for other weeks, I do. And I usually time that, if I'm teaching an 8-week course, I do allow the students to post online. And then after they have their initial posts by Wednesday, by Thursday or Friday, I may jump in a little bit more to sort of usually problem pose. It's not usually to give my opinion. It's usually to ask a question further where I see something that they may need to expand upon. I would agree with all of the panelists here that I had a really great model. I went to graduate school just as online education was emerging. So I got the experience of being an online student or in a hybrid model. And Dr. Simone Conceição from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee developed the model that I use for establishing online presence. And I do organize into small groups at the beginning of the first week for discussions. And they organize in their small groups into facilitators, summarizers, and participants. And everybody is a participant each week. So they develop their schedule, a facilitator, summarizer, and participants. And the facilitators, I have a list of the types of questions that you can ask, because for some students, they've never been asked to do that before. Like, I'm supposed to generate these questions. That is a really disconcerting kind of feeling. And of course I say, shoot them to me on the weekend, I'll give you feedback, but I do have the types of questions you might think about, comparing and contrasting, or something that's related to a current event. So I give kind of examples like that. So the facilitators have a bit of an idea of the types of things that they can draw on as they're looking at the materials for the week and the video resources. The summarizers are responsible at the end of each week then for pulling it all together. And not verbatim of what everybody says. It can be a few PowerPoint slides. It can be a paragraph summary. Sometimes people create art at the end of the week, pulling things together, or a word cloud. And then each group can kind of check out, without having to read all of the small group postings, what each group has talked about throughout the week. So that is something that I've found has been very helpful to sort of give the parameters for the students in that first week. I also organize students into a second group where they have additional online discussions, which is essentially a group project. And that is something that they can then organize synchronously or asynchronously. But I put them in a different group for that so that they get different experiences with other students. And they're also responsible for organizing that. For their group project group, I do ask that they organize one face-to-face meeting with me at the beginning of the semester. And that's a hard one to coordinate with everybody's schedules. But I have found that one face-to-face meeting with that group of students who's working on the group project has really been helpful to sort of set the cornerstone there. So I think navigating the context of the group of students you teach and the kind of course that you teach is essential in trying to sort of navigate what will work. My discussion boards are worth a lot of points. And I require APA postings, APA style, in the first Wednesday posting. It's pretty, it's been pretty much written. I mean, it doesn't have to be long, but they have written a paper almost, by the time that first, couple discussions are done. And then for the second postings, after that initial Wednesday post, they can have a little bit more, free back and forth. But I really want to see for my, intensive 8-week courses that the students are really engaging with the material, with each other, and then generating and creating new knowledge as they do that. So that's the kind of approach that I use that relates to the context of students and the content that I teach.
Fantastic. Thank you all for all your ideas. Do we have any questions right now from the audience or online? Go ahead.
You have 120 in how many classes?
In 3 different classes.
3, so there's 40.
There's 70 in my campus class, which has the same discussion, and my 2 distance classes are 30 each.
30 each?
So I have 60 online, 70 campus.
Okay, and how long?
Mine are graduate classes, and in our department, they are around between 20 and 25.
20 and 25.
About the same, 25 to 30 graduate class.
Okay.
Same, 20 to 30.
Mm-hmm.
About how many do you put in a small group?
In my small groups, I usually don't put any more than 6.
I don't put more than 3.
I do 10. 8 to 10.
Ideally 6 to 8. Sometimes I have dropout,
Yeah.
and it makes these groups later become project groups. So it gives me some concern if it gets too small.
And one of the things I didn't mention, they also fill out a small group reflection form. And on that, they talk about what I learned, how can I apply this? And then they tell me who did what, and you assign hypothetical points. So somebody may have responded 4 times as a moderator to the discussion, and I may think they were fully engaged. And I find out from the small group reflection forms, they didn't contribute to finding the article or developing questions. So they automatically lost half their points.
And then do them for each week?
Just when you're moderators, just when you're in control of the discussion. And if 2 out of the 3 indicated somebody didn't do something and a 3rd one did, then I start emailing and say, define for me a little more specifically, what was your role? How much time did you spend? And then because I let them know you're not guaranteed the full points until those reflection forms are turned in. And if you don't turn in a reflection form, they're not, you're automatically docked some points. I give them a week to turn in the reflection form.
This is my first semester teaching online. How do you schedule your week? Like, do you have a reserved hour or two on certain days that you check on your discussions, or is it a continuous thing that you do?
Yeah, my discussions end Saturday at midnight. The summary's Monday by 9 a.m. So I grade Monday morning. And if they didn't turn in the reflection forms, because I give them, you know, especially with the first time they have me in for an entire year. And so the first time I have to remind them I need the reflection forms, and that's I give them a week, but it's only on Mondays. So if they give me the reflection form Tuesday, they're still gonna have to wait till Monday to see what they scored, because yeah, there's that time blocked out on Monday mornings.
All right, I have a question from online. We have a question that many of you are mentioning the idea of group-initiated or group-led work. How do you manage situations where you have students that don't engage or check out, and what size groups? So we answered the size of groups, but if more of you could share, you know, what do you do when students just don't engage?
You know, it's interesting because of the population of learners I have. Most of my learners are working adults. And so they actually develop a community around each other. So they will, you know, I also will assume the best first, and, you know, reach out to the person in your group and, you know, ask what is exactly happening. I will reach out to the student if I notice that they are not participating. I will always do that if they've missed a week. And I mentioned it, missing a week in an 8-week course, that's a lot. So I will always reach out to the student. More than, you know, I would say 95% of the time the person will respond back that there's been some emergency. That's my learner population, or a sick child or something like that. And then we kind of talk about how to pick up from there.
I've done a couple of things. Because the points aren't worth much, it's not uncommon that they'll skip a week, and I don't worry about it because it's not worth much. But I also let them know that if you're at an 89.5, I will bump you if you didn't miss any point opportunities. And so missing 1 week in discussion makes a difference between the A and the B and the B and the C. So I don't have it happen very often. On the group contract, they have to state that if somebody is not participating, what measures they will take, and at what point they contact me, and then I contact the student. So that's eliminated me having to be involved many times because they've written it into the group rules. This is the actions we'll take, and then we report to the professor.
I would add, once I had a student who pulled back. Now, keep in mind that the classes I teach, they're graduate classes, but they also have multicultural content. So they're going to be wide variation in values and practice on some of those issues. And one time I had a student back away from the discussion, and I noticed it, and I reached out to him, and the student said, well, I just have different viewpoints, and so I just want to be silent. And I then had to assert the professor presence and say, we need to have your conversation in here. I want you to be quiet. I don't want you to be quiet. I want you to be active. Even if you have a different point of view on this topic, we still need to hear from you, and you have a valued role. And so then I have to reaffirm the necessity to have voice so that all students have equal voice in there, regardless of their opinion on this issue outside of the class. And I have to say to them, we need to hear that viewpoint in here because it helps our learning.
I have another question from online about teaching military versus civil populations. How has that been? And I don't know if anyone else but Susan has worked with that. And does that work well?
In my online classes, there are some courses where I have at least 50% military affiliated and 50% civilian. And if I have found that in those environments, the sharing that happens is very rich because there are different cultures, professional cultures that come into contact. And if there's an understanding, and we state it up front, and because there's introductions and people kind of know that, there's a really rich experience of learning there, particularly because the course is focused on teaching adults. So they can also learn from each other about different organizational contexts. And I found that students in, T-Vel comments and other kinds of things have mentioned that kind of growing and learning from each other from those two populations.
I frequently have active duty and their spouses, and it's the only time that it created a problem was when they're on a ship in the ocean. And I have to give extensions, and they post after the discussions basically ended, but there was no workaround.
I've had military deployed in the middle of the class. They go through 5 weeks and then they're gone for the next several months. I'm obliged to give them an incomplete, and then upon their return, we work out. Sometimes I don't have the luxury, even before they leave, of talking to them about a learning contract upon their return. Sometimes that just won't happen. But when the student contacts me again, we talk about projects that were completed, and we figure out a way. In some cases, the student has but a couple of activities to finish. Other times, I ask them to intentionally come into my next offering of that class to complete the discussion part of the grading assignment. And I continue to work with them to make sure they have fulfilled that obligation.
I've done the same thing, whether it's military or other reasons, when you give an incomplete because it's hard to make up those discussion kinds of elements. And so a lot of times I'll bring them into my next semester for discussion.
I think you all bring up a really good point about being intentional in finding out why students aren't participating, understanding their circumstances, being flexible with that, but still insisting that they participate, that they can't just avoid it. Yeah.
One more comment related to this topic of students having to leave class. I've been teaching online long enough that my students have survived Katrina and some of the natural disasters last year, both the hurricane disasters and fire disasters. And sometimes I've taken the leadership of calling Global Campus and asking for advice about how to provide accommodation. And I've talked with other faculty peers. But when a natural emergency has happened, sometimes I will simply, in an email, inform the class. Some of our class members are going through a crisis, and it's going to affect our groups and some of the other activities. And then I just send a note, and I may not hear from the student if they're in a place where internet's gone down. I may not hear from them for a few days. When you get relocated, when you get in a safe place, contact me again, and we'll then talk again about how to bring you back into the class. And I suspend any grading on participation or any leadership roles until the student is in a safe place. And then I usually will inform Global Campus, or they will contact me, and we just have a dialogue. And I ask Global Campus staff and administrative folks, does this make sense? Am I being respectful? And I consult with some of my other peers about it.
And the Student Affairs Office is also there for students, distant students in those situations as well.
Yeah,
So
I've had some of that, and I'll tell them about the Office of Student Life, and they're like, "What?" And so, and then I've had twice now. I've done that, and they're like, "Thank you for sending me that direction." They didn't even realize that resource was there.
Well, because I tell them if they have a note from the Office of Student Life, or I receive one, then I need to know very few details about what's going on.
Right.
All I need is that notification, and you're going to get exceptions.
Yep.
And I tell them to make it easier on them because they can have one point of contact instead of call all 5 professors. And they seem to like that. So
I think that applies to all services on campus, on your online classes, making students aware of resources, that they can take advantage of, the writing lab or different supports.
yeah, definitely. Any suggestion for using discussion in asynchronous classes? Pretty much all of us are asynchronous in this, but you talk a little bit about how you manage the process, having a due date Wednesday and Saturday or Sunday or something like that.
It's on the syllabus.
Yeah.
The discussions are, they start, you have to be posted by 9 a.m. Monday. Your response has to be Saturday by midnight. Put Central Time, and I just list Central Time. I do not do Daylight Savings Time anymore because not all states participate. That got me in trouble. And So, always emphasize central time. And even if they send me a fleeting email, oh, I forgot, I'm 4 hours behind, will you accept it? It's no, I'm sorry, I won't. And yeah, just hold true to the deadlines.
You can
Be
also add things to the calendar. So it's not an assignment, but it's just a reminder. So
The very
that pops
first
on there.
week, I do send an email and say, this is new to you, your post is due, just to remind them. I only do that once, and I tell them, this is the only email you get.
Now, I will add that after one of the Global Campus workshops I participated in, I made the decision to move my start date for my groups to Tuesday. That gives the group facilitator or group leader time to organize questions and manage any other kinds of things, and it gives participants time to finish the reading. And I'm observing that over the next couple of semesters, but I think that's a better arrangement. And my colleague who teaches a similar section of multicultural advising, she has said to her class, I don't return emails over the weekend. I need that time for myself. I tend to respond if something comes on a Friday night, I will respond. But again, what my colleague has done is that she set that parameter out and she informs her class in the syllabus early in the semester so that they know that she's not available for responding over the weekend.
Excellent point. It is really okay for all of you to set limitations. You do not have to be available 24/7, 7 days a week. You really, really don't.
And I have one of my Zoom office hours on Saturday morning because my assignments and final posts are usually due at midnight Saturday. So I don't have a lot of people that come in, but it's an opportunity for them to do it. I just do it for 30 minutes on Saturday morning, sitting there watching the Food Channel or whatever. If somebody pops in, then I pause the TV. But anyway.
I think that something that you outlined, Laura, at the very beginning, that's just critical for managing the online discussions that each of us has talked about in some way is just really setting up that rubric or what the parameters are and expectations from the very beginning. So they're supposed to respond by Wednesday, but then by how many peers and by when and what do those posts have to look like? All of those things, students want to know, and if you are vague with it, then we can't expect the students to, engage in the ways that we would like them to. So.
I did have one comment when we were talking about like the due dates and responding on weekends. In the beginning, all my courses, I use a 2-week module. And so at the beginning, I was like, okay, and everything's due at the end. What was on Sunday night? Seemed to make sense. Well, I don't know. Now what I do is if I still use 2-week modules, the next one will open, they overlap on Sunday. So a 2-week module will start on a Sunday and then it goes through the 2 weeks, but then ends on the next Monday. So it's really, 2 weeks and an extra day? Because then if they do their stuff at the last minute on that last weekend, they have time on Monday to get a hold of me. So I don't feel that on Sunday night I should be checking everything. Then I have that Monday to do that. But then I've got the overachievers who were done that first week anyway. So it kind of lets them pick which type, they can make it fit. Because I've got all adult learner people, mostly, and so that way they can make it work for their schedule.
Well, it is noon. Do you want to ask one?
I do have, from time to time, I teach at Fort Leavenworth and I teach at the Olathe campus. And I do have, not 50-50, but there may be a week or two where it is a blended course. And so those students have face-to-face and online participation.
I'd be happy to talk to you more.